Today I'm going to talk to you about big, hairy, audacious goals. Big, hairy, audacious goals are a management strategy used by big companies. And those big companies use them to try and stretch their staff to reach further than they could possibly reach. Today I'm going to talk to you about how you can use the concept of big, hairy, audacious goals as an individual and achieve them every time. 25 years ago, my life was very different. I was a UN negotiator working in Sarajevo, the capital of Bosnia. Bosnia at the time was in the grip of a fierce war of secession from former Yugoslavia. Sarajevo, the capital city, was under siege, a siege which would last for 1,425 days and take over 14,000 lives. My role back in 1994 was as liaison officer for the UN Fire Department. The UN Fire Department was a group of firefighters and paramedics, mainly from the UK, the US, and Canada. And they would take their 4 weeks vacation every year from their job back at home, come to Sarajevo as volunteers to try and save civilian lives. My job was to keep them alive. This is me in 1994. As I said, life was very different then, and Sarajevo was a very dangerous place. As a result of Sarajevo being so dangerous, every member of international staff had a handheld radio, so that if they found themselves in trouble, they could call a central call sign and be collected by the UN military. The UN Fire Department had a collective call sign, Voodoo. The chief was Voodoo 1, the deputy chief Voodoo 2, I was Voodoo 3, and so on up to 12 Voodoo call signs. I realized early in my tenure that if we were going to achieve our mandate of saving people's civilian lives, we really needed to engage other people. It wasn't all down to us. We needed to engage other people in our task. And I decided that the way to do that was to make friends with them before we actually needed them. Because if they felt as if they were our friends and they were just helping us because they were our friends, then they were more likely to actually do what we needed them to do. In order to make friends, I decided to institute a weekly party at the firehouse. We'd invite everyone that was important to us, the Norwegian Movement Control, the French who delivered fuel to Sarajevo. And we invited them every Monday. We'd give them some food, we'd give them a beer, and we'd try and make friends with them. As a result, the firehouse came to be known as the Voodoo Lounge. Coincidentally, in 1994, the Rolling Stones released their album, Voodoo Lounge. We joked, maybe it's about us. But we didn't get to listen to the CD on the day it arrived because we had a very busy day. But at 10 o'clock at night, the local police called a curfew to get all the civilians off the streets. They called a curfew, and we would go back to the firehouse and we'd open a beer, we'd play cards, and we'd sit around and discuss the day and try and get those difficult problems that had happened through the day and think about how we could deal with them. Imagine my surprise when I sat down that night and started to read the insert of the Voodoo Lounge album. Because in the center pages, I found this picture. 12 people with no lives, playing cards and drinking beer. I thought, it's us. Maybe it really is about us. And as I sat and thought about that while everyone else played cards and drank beer, I said, maybe it's a sign. Maybe I should get the Rolling Stones to come and play a show in Sarajevo. And I laughed. Nobody else laughed, so I went to bed. The following morning, I woke up, was making coffee, and my boss said to me, you know, that was a really good idea last night. And I said, what was? He said, getting the Rolling Stones to come and play a show in Sarajevo. Imagine how that would pick people up. Imagine how it would give them some relief if they had something else to focus on except being in the middle of a war. He was serious. 2 days later, I was in London. I'd been sent to London to ask the Rolling Stones to come to Sarajevo and play a gig. Of course, I had no idea how to find the Rolling Stones. It was before the internet. So I found their album cover. I thought if I can find, maybe there's an address on their album cover, how I can get hold of them. But what I did find was that their record label was Virgin Records. That's easy, I thought. There's a Virgin Records on Oxford Street. Yeah, only it was Virgin Records, the store who sold records, not Virgin Records, the one who manages bands. Undeterred, I decided I was there, so I was going to ask the question. So I stood in line with all the people buying their CDs and stepped forward one at a time and eventually arrived at the teenager on the desk. He was confused because the crazy Scottish man didn't want to buy a CD. He didn't want to buy a T-shirt. He was going on about the Voodoo Lounge and the Rolling Stones and war in Sarajevo and the Rolling Stones playing a gig. Quite soon, he reached under the desk and pressed the alarm. It's true. Security arrived, and a bit of a rumpus took off. And luckily, the manager of the store was passing, and he came across and said, "What seems to be the problem here?" So I told him the story about the firefighter volunteers in Sarajevo and how we were called the Voodoo Lounge, and the Rolling Stones had released their album, and we just wanted them to come and play a gig in Sarajevo. He looked at me for a moment and invited me to his office. He explained on the way that he wasn't Virgin Records and he didn't know who the Rolling Stones were, but he did have a friend who worked at the record label in marketing, and he said he'd give her a call. So we sat down, he called her. I told her the whole story from start to finish about the firefighters in Sarajevo, about the siege, about the Rolling Stones album, and that we wanted them to come and play a gig in Sarajevo. She laughed. And then said, "My boss will love this story. Let me just put you through." I spoke to the director of marketing, told the director of marketing the story about the Voodoo Lounge and the gig and the siege of Sarajevo. He laughed too. And he said, "Just hold for 1 minute." A few seconds later, the global head of the Virgin Empire answered the phone. "Richard Branson." I thought, this is it. Actually, I've got the man who can make the decision. He can send the Rolling Stones to Sarajevo. So I told him the whole story from start to finish. The siege, the war, everything. The Rolling Stones, it would be an amazing show. He laughed and he said, "That's a wonderful story, Trevor. We're going to give you a box of CDs to take back to Sarajevo. We're going to give you some T-shirts. But I've got to tell you, the Rolling Stones aren't coming to play your show. There's a war on." I protested. I knew there was a war on. I said, "Of course, that's why it's going to be such a great show." He wasn't with me. So I went back to Sarajevo with a big box of T-shirts and CDs and my tail between my legs. When I arrived back in the firehouse, it was late. The guys were playing cards and drinking beer, just like they did every night. And there was a British Army major who was also there. And I told them the story that I'd failed. I'd failed in my quest to get the Rolling Stones to come to Sarajevo. And he said, No, you haven't failed. This idea is too good to drop. And the idea wasn't to get the Rolling Stones to come to Sarajevo. It was to put on a show, to lift people's spirits. It's the outcome that's important. So, quickly, he asked around, did we have any contacts in the music industry? Did anyone know anyone that could come and play a show? To cut a long story short, because my time's going short, someone knew Lemmy Kilmister of Motorhead. He called Lemmy. He said, "Will you come and play a show in Sarajevo?" Lemmy said, "Sure, I'll do it." 3 weeks later, Motorhead pulled out. Apparently there was a war on. We were in trouble. We'd arranged a gig, we'd arranged backline, we'd found a venue, and we didn't have a band to play it. Things were getting desperate. Again, the major came to my rescue. He said, "What about we call the editor of Kerrang magazine? He knows lots of bands. Maybe he can suggest someone who might come." We called and spoke to him. He was unequivocal. There's only one person crazy enough to do this show. Bruce Dickinson. Bruce Dickinson, the lead singer of Iron Maiden. Only Bruce wasn't with Iron Maiden at the time. He was on a break from Iron Maiden, and he was touring his solo album with a band called Skunkworks. It took us 2 or 3 days to get a hold of him, but we got a hold of him through his management, and he said, yeah, I'll do it. I'll do the show. We were gobsmacked. We were a bit worried that he was going to pull out at the last minute. So we said to him, okay, so you know there's a war on. He said, yeah, I know. We said, okay, so the deal is, you get to Split, we'll put you on a UN helicopter in Split, fly you to Sarajevo, you do the show, back on the helicopter, go. You're in Sarajevo for the least time possible. There'll be no time for sightseeing. He said, I know there'll be no time, there's a war. We said, okay, so there might not be electric. The city's under siege. If there's no electric, there'll be no show. He said, I get it. We said, one final one. We can't actually guarantee your safety. He said, I know, there's a war. So, that's how it happened. He flew to Split. He transferred to the UN helicopter department. There was a problem. And this is where it all started to go downhill. He arrived at the helicopter department and he was told, it's become too dangerous. The situation's got worse. We can't get you to Sarajevo. Not safely. We can't guarantee your safety. Bruce wasn't deterred at that point. He and the band had a show of hands. Who thought they should still do it? They decided they'd come that far. They weren't going back. They hitched a ride with a humanitarian aid truck, convoy, a yellow one. Unarmored, with no papers, and with no convoy with them, they traveled through Bosnia, past Mostar, and up to Sarajevo. Of course, they arrived on the edge of Sarajevo, and Sarajevo was under siege. They couldn't get into Sarajevo. That was perhaps the point that we came up with our stupidest of ideas. How were we going to get them into Sarajevo? Well, the only way we could do it was to smuggle them across the front line at dawn. What could possibly go wrong? If you want to hear the rest of the story, you can watch the movie, Scream for Me Sarajevo. It was released last year. Now, I want to go back to our big, hairy, audacious goals. Because these are lessons I learned in Sarajevo and I've used throughout my life since. 6 lessons for you. Here's my methodology. Number 1, focus on outcomes. The important thing is getting to the big objective. What is it that you actually want to achieve? Focus on that. Number 2, break complex goals down into little steps. If you say, I want to climb to the top of Everest, that sounds like an enormous goal. If you say, what do I need to do that? Okay, well, first of all, I need a license to go on the mountain. Second of all, I need to be able to climb. Third of all, I need to get the equipment to go. Fourth of all, I need to plan the expedition. And after that, it's just one foot in front of the other until you get to the top of the mountain. Number 3, own it. The problem is yours. The objective is yours. You won't be able to do everything yourself, but it's your job to engage everyone that you need to engage to get to that objective. Number 4, be monomaniacal. You need to be absolutely single-minded in achieving that goal. Leave no stone unturned. Absolute focus. But, number 5, understand that you will be knocked back. People will say no. There will be walls that you need to climb over. But number 6, don't give up. Not ever. Because the Sistine Chapel wasn't built in a day. Green Day didn't have their first hit record till they'd been together for 8 years. And TED Talks didn't become a global phenomenon overnight. Thank you.